Captain Lee pressed his face against the cold metal window of Earth's biggest space station. His breath made small clouds on the glass as he stared out into the darkness. Then he saw them. Ships. Hundreds and hundreds of alien ships appearing. Out of nowhere, like ghosts materializing in a horror movie. The black metal of their hulls caught the light from distant stars, making them look like deadly jewels scattered across space. Each alien ship was massive, bigger than anything humans had ever built. They moved in perfect formation, like a school of metal fish swimming through the void. Lee had been a space captain for 20 years, but he had never seen anything that made his stomach drop like this. The enemy fleet stretched so far that he couldn't see where it ended, disappearing into the black distance beyond the moon. Down in the communications center, Commander Park sat at her desk, trying to keep her hands steady. The alien message was coming through their computers, and the translation software was working overtime to make sense of the strange language. When the voice finally came through in clear Korean, it was deep and cold like winter wind. The alien called himself Warlord. Vex, and his words were simple but terrifying. Earth had exactly 72 hours to give up completely. No negotiations, no deals, no second chances. Surrender everything, or watch their entire planet burn. Park had to replay the message 3 times before her brain could accept what she was hearing. This wasn't a movie or a nightmare. This was really happening. The message spread through Earth's military networks faster than wildfire. Within an hour, every government leader, every military commander, every scientist working on space defense knew that humanity was facing its darkest moment. The aliens weren't interested in talking. They weren't interested in sharing the galaxy. They wanted Earth to bow down or die. Admiral Kim called an emergency meeting in the secret military bunker, deep under Seoul. The room was small and cramped, filled with screens showing star maps and ship positions. 20 of Earth's best military minds crowded around a metal table, their faces lit by the blue glow of computer displays. The numbers on the screens told a story that nobody wanted to believe. Earth had 47 spaceships that could fight. The aliens had more than 800 massive warships, each one capable of destroying entire cities. Kim ran the battle, calculations over and over on his computer, changing strategies, moving ships around like pieces on a chessboard. Every single simulation ended the same way. Total human defeat in less than 6 hours. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the final numbers. Some of the younger officers looked like they might be sick. Others just sat staring at their hands, trying to process the impossible situation. Earth's entire space fleet wouldn't even slow down the alien invasion. It would be like throwing paper airplanes at a hurricane. But in a secret laboratory hidden beneath the mountains outside Busan, Dr. Yoon was working on something that might change everything. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, surviving on coffee and determination. Her hands moved quickly over strange machines and glowing devices that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The stellar burn device was her life's work, a weapon that could turn matter itself into fuel for an unstoppable fire. She had run thousands of computer tests, but never tried it on anything bigger than a small asteroid. The theory suggested it could do incredible damage, but theory and reality were 2 very different things. If she was wrong, humanity would die, with no chance of fighting back. As the deadline got closer, President Choi stood before cameras broadcasting to the entire world. Every television, every phone, every computer screen on Earth showed his face. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. Behind him, the alien fleet hung in space like a promise of doom. The president's words were simple, but they carried the weight of human history. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not kneel. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it standing up, fighting until the very end. His speech lasted only 3 minutes, but those words would be remembered forever as the moment when Earth chose death over slavery. The countdown had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn what humans would do when faced with impossible odds. The alien fleet spread out across space like a giant net, each ship taking its position with mechanical precision. Warlord Vex stood on his command bridge, watching the formation complete itself. He had done this dance 43 times before on 43 different worlds. First came the overwhelming display of power, then the ultimatum, then the inevitable. Surrender. It always worked the same way. Vex had conquered entire star systems using this exact method. Show up with impossible numbers, give them time to realize they couldn't win, then accept their surrender when they finally understood the hopelessness of their situation. Most species took less than a day to give up once they saw his fleet. The smart ones surrendered immediately. The stubborn ones took a few hours to run their calculations and realized the math didn't work in their favor. But something felt different about these humans. Their communications networks were buzzing with activity, but nobody was trying to contact his fleet to negotiate. That was unusual. Most species at least tried to bargain for better surrender terms or beg for mercy. The humans seemed to be ignoring his fleet entirely, which made no tactical sense. Down on Earth's remaining military ships, Captain Shin sat in front of a device that looked like a radio mixed with a computer. The quantum communicator was humanity's most advanced piece of technology, allowing instant communication across vast distances. His fingers moved across the controls, opening channels to every single human ship still capable of fighting. One by one, the voices of Earth's remaining captains came through the speakers. 47 ships, 47 crews, 47 groups of people who knew they were probably about to die. Shin could hear the fear in some voices, determination in others, but nobody was talking about surrender. Dr. Yoon's experimental devices had been installed on every vessel during the night, turning their entire fleet into something the aliens had never encountered before. The stellar burn device looked harmless enough, just a metal box about the size of a microwave oven. But inside that box was technology that could change the basic rules of how matter worked. Instead of normal explosions that needed fuel and oxygen, this device could turn anything it touched into fuel for a fire that burned by itself. The theory was terrifying. The reality was about to be worse. Lieutenant Han sat in the alien communication monitoring station, listening to the enemy fleet's radio chatter through their translation computers. For the past hour, he had been hearing the same confident board voices discussing formation positions and surrender procedures. But now those voices were changing. Confusion was creeping in, concern, then something that sounded almost like worry. The alien commanders were talking about the human ship's behavior. According to their instruments, Earth's tiny fleet wasn't running away or powering down weapons in preparation for surrender. Instead, every human ship was turning toward the alien fleet and accelerating. Not backing down, not trying to escape, but flying straight at 800 enemy warships like they actually thought they could win. Han listened to the alien confusion growing stronger. They were asking each other questions. Why weren't the humans surrendering? Why were they approaching instead of retreating? Had they developed some secret weapon? The alien voices were starting to sound less confident and more puzzled. Colonel, Moon's voice came through the communication system, reaching every human ship at once. His words were calm but filled with purpose. They were doing this not just for Earth, but for every planet the aliens would attack next. Every species that would face this same impossible choice. Every world that would be forced to kneel or die. The stellar burn devices began humming with power. Across 47 ships, the strange boxes started glowing with an eerie light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The energy readings were unlike anything in human experience. The devices were warming up, preparing to turn matter itself into an unstoppable weapon. Commander Bay piloted the fastest human ship, a sleek fighter that had been built for speed rather than heavy combat. She was the first to reach the alien formation, her ship streaking through space like a metal comet. The aliens were still trying to figure out what the humans were planning when she flew directly between two massive enemy warships. Her finger found the activation switch for Dr. Yoon's device. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then light exploded around her ship, but it wasn't normal light. It was fire that burned in the vacuum of space, fire that didn't need air or fuel, fire that ate the metal and energy around it and grew stronger. The flames consumed Bay's ship instantly, but they didn't stop there. They jumped to the alien vessels like a living thing, covering their black hulls with burning energy that turned their own metal into more fuel. 3 massive enemy warships became torches in space, burning with fire that couldn't be put out, because it made its own fuel from everything it touched. The galaxy was about to learn that humans would rather burn the universe than live on their knees. Warlord Vex pressed his face against the viewing window of his command ship, watching something. That shouldn't have been possible. The fire that had consumed the first human ship wasn't going out. Instead, it was moving. Actually moving through the vacuum of space like it was alive, reaching out with tendrils of flame that jumped from one ship to another without any connection between them. Normal fire needed fuel and oxygen to burn. Space had neither of those things, which was why explosions in space were brief flashes that died quickly. But this fire was different. It didn't follow the rules that governed the rest of the universe. It created its own fuel by eating whatever it touched, turning metal and energy and even empty space into more flames. The alien commander had fought in hundreds of battles across dozens of star systems. He had seen every type of weapon that existed in the galaxy. Plasma cannons, antimatter bombs, gravity crushers, reality distorters. But nothing had prepared him for fire that spread like a disease, jumping from target to target without caring about distance or barriers. 3 of his massive warships had become burning torches in less than a minute. The flames covered their hulls completely, turning their black metal into flowing rivers of light. But the fire wasn't content to just burn those 3 ships. It was reaching out, sending streams of energy toward other vessels in the formation, looking for new fuel to consume. Navigator Ro had been piloting her small fighter when she saw the first alien ship catch fire. She understood immediately what Dr. Yoon's device could really do. It wasn't just a weapon that destroyed things. It was a weapon that turned destruction into more destruction, feeding on itself and growing stronger with everything it consumed. Ro aimed her ship toward the center of the largest alien battle group, where 12 enormous warships flew in tight formation. Her stellar burn device was already humming with power, ready to turn her fighter into a guided missile of impossible fire. She had been a pilot for 15 years, but she had never flown a mission that mattered as much as this one. When her ship exploded in the middle of the alien formation, the fire spread in all directions at once. It jumped between the enemy vessels, like lightning, but lightning that didn't fade after a split second. The flames flowed over their shields as if the energy barriers weren't even there. They ate through armor that had been designed to withstand the heat of dying stars. The most terrifying thing was how the fire seemed to learn. It found the weak points in each ship's design, the places where energy flowed most freely. It converted the aliens' own power systems into fuel, turning their weapons and engines into sources of more flame. 12 warships became 12 funeral pyres in the span of 3 minutes. Captain Zhang was in her communications center when she saw what was happening to the alien fleet. She had been preparing to make her own attack run, but something even stranger was occurring. The enemy ships that hadn't been directly hit by human attacks were starting to burn anyway. Her instruments showed impossible readings. The fire was somehow jumping across space without traveling through the distance between ships. It was appearing on vessels that were hundreds of miles away from the original flames, as if the very idea of burning had become contagious and could spread through some invisible connection. Zhang activated her long-range transmitter and sent her final message back to Earth. Her voice was calm despite the fact that her own ship was beginning to glow with the same unnatural fire. She reported that the flames were following the aliens even when they tried to escape by jumping into hyperspace, the faster-than-light travel that allowed movement between star systems. The surviving alien ships were panicking now. Vex could hear the fear in his commander's voices as they reported that the fire was chasing them through dimensions that shouldn't have allowed physical matter to exist. Ships that fled to distant parts of the solar system were spontaneously bursting into flames, even though they had never been near the battle. The fire had somehow become connected to the aliens themselves, following some invisible trail that linked every ship in their empire. It didn't matter how far they ran or how fast they traveled. The flames found them anyway, appearing inside their hulls like ghosts made of pure destruction. Within 6 hours, Vex's mighty fleet of 800 warships had been reduced to less than 50 survivors scattered across multiple star systems. The rest had become drifting clouds of burning debris, still glowing with fire that refused to die. Even the wreckage continued to burn, creating a field of light that could be seen from Earth's surface. The aliens who managed to escape were no longer thinking about conquest. They were thinking about survival, fleeing toward their home worlds, while the impossible fire chased them through space like a predator that would never stop hunting. The humans had turned their own deaths into a weapon that could follow enemies across the galaxy, and nothing in the universe seemed capable of stopping it. Emperor Thak had ruled the galaxy for over 300 years from his crystal palace on the Keth homeworld. His empire stretched across 1,000 star systems, with billions of slaves working to feed his war machine. He had never retreated from anything in his entire life. But now he stood in his private chambers, watching his servants pack his most precious belongings into escape pods. Through the massive windows of his palace, Thak could see his own fleet burning in the sky above his planet. Ships that had been stationed there for decades, as the ultimate defense, were now floating torches, consumed by fire that had traveled impossible distances to find them. The flames had somehow jumped across light years in an instant, appearing inside his most secure systems without warning. The Emperor's hands shook as he received reports from across his empire. The fire wasn't just burning ships near Earth anymore. It was everywhere at once, appearing in star systems that had never heard of humans. Ancient fortress worlds that had stood unconquered for centuries were watching their orbital defenses turn into burning wreckage. On the mining world of Zelkor Prime, the alien overseers who had terrorized the local population for generations suddenly found themselves running for their lives. The Keth garrison commander watched in disbelief as his entire fleet spontaneously burst into flames while docked at the space station. Ships that had been turned off with no power running through their systems somehow caught fire anyway. Enslaved miners stopped their work and looked up at the sky, seeing something they had never witnessed before. Their masters were afraid. The beings who had seemed all-powerful, who had crushed every rebellion and answered every act of defiance with overwhelming violence, were screaming in panic and fleeing toward escape pods. Zara, a young slave who had been working the mines since she was old enough to hold tools, whispered to her fellow workers about the rumors spreading through the underground communication networks. A species called humans had done something impossible. They had faced the entire Keth Empire and chosen to die fighting rather than surrender. The story spread from world to world through secret channels that the Keth had never been able to completely shut down. Slaves who had been broken by centuries of oppression began talking about the humans who had turned their own deaths into weapons. They spoke of fire that couldn't be stopped, of an enemy that had chosen mutual destruction over submission. Fleet Admiral Kor received the Emperor's desperate orders to contain the spreading fire, but he was watching his own command ship begin to glow with the same impossible flames. Every vessel he sent to investigate the phenomenon joined the burning constellation that was sweeping through Keth space like some kind of avenging spirit. Kor had been the Empire's greatest military strategist, the architect of a dozen successful conquests. But this wasn't a battle he could win with tactics or superior numbers. The fire seemed to exist outside the normal rules of physics, appearing wherever Keth technology was present and consuming everything it touched. The Admiral's final report to Emperor Thak was brief and terrifying. The fire was following some invisible connection that linked every ship, every station, every piece of Keth technology in the galaxy. It was burning through 17 star systems simultaneously, turning the Empire's greatest strongholds into fields of drifting ash. On the agricultural world of Vesa, the local population watched their Keth governors flee in burning ships that left trails of fire across the sky. The farmers who had been forced to grow food for the Empire's armies suddenly found themselves free, their overseers dead or gone, their orbital prison destroyed by flames that had come from nowhere. The news networks that the Keth had controlled for centuries began broadcasting something new. Instead of propaganda about the Empire's victories, they were showing images of burning fleets and evacuated worlds. The announcers, many of them slaves themselves, began telling the truth about what was happening. They spoke of a small blue planet called Earth, where beings called humans had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. They described how these humans had turned their own deaths into a weapon that followed their enemies across the galaxy, burning with fire that fed on matter itself. The enslaved worlds began to understand that the impossible had happened. The Keth Empire, which had seemed eternal and unstoppable, was crumbling in real time. Their fleets were ash, their fortresses were empty, their leaders were fleeing toward the edges of known space. Within months, 1,000 worlds that had been ruled by fear for centuries were declaring their independence. The fire had finally burned itself out, consuming 17 entire star systems before disappearing as mysteriously as it had appeared. But the damage to the Empire was complete and irreversible. The Keth who survived scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy. No longer conquerors, but refugees fleeing from the legend of their own defeat. They carried with them the memory of humans who had refused to kneel, who had chosen to burn the universe rather than live as slaves. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had never known freedom, beings looked up at the stars and whispered the words that had toppled an empire. They chose to burn rather than kneel. Ambassador Sue walked slowly through the corridors of the massive space station that orbited where Earth used to be. The hallways were filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, all of them here for the same reason. They had come to see the place where humanity had made its final stand, where a small blue planet had chosen to burn rather than surrender. Sue herself was one of the last survivors of the Korean evacuation ships that had escaped Earth just hours before the final battle. She had watched from a distance as her homeworld disappeared in flames that consumed everything, including the humans who had created them. Now she carried the responsibility of speaking for a species that no longer existed except in memory. The Galactic Assembly was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Instead of one empire ruling over everyone else, it was a collection of free worlds that made decisions together. Representatives from hundreds of planets sat in a giant circular chamber, each one equal to the others, each one free to speak their mind without fear. When Sue stood to address the assembly, the entire chamber fell silent. She was small compared to many of the alien species present, but everyone knew what she represented. She was the voice of the humans who had lit the fire that burned down the greatest empire in galactic history. Her speech was simple but powerful. She spoke about the choice her people had made when faced with impossible odds. They could have surrendered and lived as slaves, or they could fight and die as free beings. The humans had chosen freedom even though it meant extinction. The memorial station where Sue lived had become one of the most important places in the galaxy. Every day ships arrived carrying pilgrims from worlds that had been freed from Keth rule. They came to walk through the museum that displayed artifacts from Earth's final days, to read the messages that human families had sent to their loved ones in the fleet, to understand what it meant to choose death over slavery. In the center of the station was a simple room containing General Lim's final recording. He had been the last human commander to die in the battle, and his ship's computer had somehow survived the flames long enough to preserve his words. The recording played continuously, day and night for anyone who wanted to hear it. Lim's voice was calm and steady as he spoke to the camera, even though fires were consuming his ship around him. He talked about the choice humanity had made, not just for themselves, but for every species that would face tyranny in the future. His final words had become the motto of the new Galactic Alliance. "We may die today, but tyranny dies with us." Those words were carved into the walls of government buildings on 100 different worlds. They were painted on banners carried by freedom fighters who were still fighting against the remnants of oppressive governments. They were whispered by slaves who dreamed of liberation and shouted by revolutionaries who refused to accept defeat. The phrase, "Remember Earth," had spread even further than Lim's words. It appeared in graffiti on alien worlds, in secret messages passed between resistance cells, in songs sung by people who had never seen a human but understood what humanity had sacrificed. It became a symbol that meant the same thing in every language. Freedom was worth dying for. Former slaves across the galaxy had become the leaders of the new free worlds. Zara, the young miner who had worked the Zelkor Prime mines, was now the planetary governor leading the reconstruction efforts. She often spoke about the day she first heard about the humans, how their story had given her the courage to believe that even the most powerful empire could fall. On Vesa, the agricultural world that had fed the Keth armies, the farmers had transformed their forced labor camps into schools and hospitals. They taught their children about Earth, about the small planet that had shown the galaxy what true courage looked like. The children learned that sometimes the greatest victory came through sacrifice. The galaxy was a different place now, where once there had been a single empire controlling everything through fear. There were now thousands of independent worlds working together by choice. Trade flowed freely between systems, cultures mixed and learned from each other, and new technologies developed that helped everyone instead of just the rulers. But the greatest change was in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's inhabitants. They had learned that freedom wasn't something that could be given by others or taken away by force. It was something that lived inside every thinking being, something that could only be destroyed if they chose to let it die. Earth was gone, consumed, in the flames that its people had created to destroy their enemies. But from those ashes had grown something more powerful than any empire. Hope had spread across the galaxy like the fire that had burned the Keth fleet, touching every world and every heart that yearned for freedom. The humans had taught the galaxy that some things were worth dying for, and in doing so, they had made it possible for countless others to live free. "Your words," the warrior said, its translator working at barely above a whisper. "I return them to you." Hana reached out with shaking hands to take the letter. Her fingers brushed against the alien's claws as she accepted it, and she was surprised by how warm they were. She had expected something cold and reptilian, but the Krex's skin was warm with life and what might have been emotion. Then the impossible happened. The 8-foot warrior began to lower itself toward the floor. Not kneeling, not crouching, but performing a movement that Hana had only heard described in military briefings about alien cultures. The Krex was assuming the position of the Karath Vel, the bow of ultimate honor that was reserved for the greatest heroes of their species. No human had ever seen a Krex perform the Karath Vel. Most humans didn't even know it existed. It was something the warrior species did only for those who had achieved legendary status in battle, and even then, only after they had died gloriously in combat. For a living being to receive such honor was unheard of. For a human to receive it was beyond comprehension. The alien's massive form folded downward until its head nearly touched the floor at Hana's feet. Its 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of complete vulnerability, exposing its neck and vital organs to potential attack. In Krex culture, this was the ultimate expression of respect and acknowledgement of superiority. Gasps echoed through the medical bay. A Thyran medic dropped its medical scanner with a clatter that seemed to echo like thunder in the stunned silence. The Zelon diplomat's compound eyes went wide with shock, and it began clicking its mandibles in rapid, agitated bursts. Even the crystalline Nexari stopped their musical chiming entirely. "I have misunderstood human strength," the Krex said, its voice muffled by its position but still clear through the translator. The mechanical device seemed to struggle with the alien's changed tone, producing words that sounded almost gentle. "Among my people, we measure warriors by the number of enemies they have killed in battle, by the fear they inspire in their foes, by the territory they conquer and the wealth they accumulate." The warrior remained in its prostrate position as it continued speaking. "But you fight not for glory or conquest, not for fear or dominance. You fight to save those who cannot save themselves. You sacrifice everything, your comfort, your health, your very life, not to destroy but to preserve." Slowly, the Krex began to rise from its bow. When it stood again, its posture was completely transformed. Gone was the aggressive dominance it had displayed earlier. Instead, there was something that looked almost like humility in its stance. "This is a strength my people do not understand," the alien continued. "We can break worlds and shatter fleets, but we cannot do what you do. We cannot love something more than ourselves." The warrior stepped aside and gestured toward the chair by the viewport, the same chair it had claimed so aggressively earlier. But the gesture was different now, filled with respect rather than condescension. "Please," it said simply. But the idol Krex wasn't finished. With movements that were both careful and decisive, it reached up and unfastened the ceremonial cloak that hung from its shoulders. The garment was clearly important, made from some kind of scaled hide that shimmered in the medical bay's lights, decorated with symbols that spoke of battles won and honors earned. The alien spread the cloak over the chair's cushioned seat, transforming it from simple furniture into something approaching a throne. The cloak would provide padding for Hana's injured leg and protection from the cold metal arms of the chair. "For your comfort," the Krex said, stepping back to give her space. Hana looked around the medical bay and saw that every single alien was staring at her with expressions she had never seen before. Not mockery or dismissal or casual indifference, but something that looked like wonder. Like they were seeing not just her but humanity itself in a completely new light. The Thyran medic approached slowly, its medical kit in hand, and tears in its large black eyes. "Please," it whispered. "Let me help you to the chair. It would be an honor."